When my son handed me eviction papers for my own home and told me I had 30 days to move out, I just smiled and said, "Let me make one phone call." What happened next left him speechless and taught him the most expensive lesson of his life. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and at 74 years old, I've lived through enough surprises to fill several lifetimes. Growing up in the small town of Willowbrook during the 1950s, I learned early that life rarely goes according to plan. My parents owned a small textile mill, and I watched them build their business from nothing, working 18-hour days and never taking a vacation until I graduated high school. After finishing my education at Riverside University with a degree in business administration, I returned home with big dreams and an even bigger determination to make something of myself. This was 1972, and women in business weren't exactly welcomed with open arms. I remember walking into my first bank meeting, wearing my best navy suit and carrying a briefcase full of carefully prepared documents, only to have the loan officer ask if my husband would be joining us for the real discussion. That day changed everything for me. Instead of being discouraged, I became fiercer. I started my own consulting firm, Whitmore and Associates, specializing in helping small businesses optimize their operations. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it allowed me to help people while building something of my own. The early years were brutal. I worked out of my tiny apartment above Henderson's Bakery on Maple Street, surviving on day-old pastries and determination. My first client was Mrs. Rodriguez, who owned a struggling hardware store on the outskirts of town. She was 3 months behind on rent and considering closing down. I spent weeks analyzing her inventory, reorganizing her supply chain, and helping her negotiate better terms with suppliers. Within 6 months, her business was thriving. Word spread quickly in Willowbrook. Soon I had more clients than I could handle. The struggling diner on Fifth Avenue, the family-owned bookstore that hadn't turned a profit in 2 years, the auto repair shop that was drowning in paperwork, they all found their way to my door. Each success story brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. By 1980, I had moved into a proper office in the newly renovated Riverside building downtown. I hired my first employee, a brilliant young accountant named Patricia Wells, who became not just my business partner, but one of my closest friends. Together, we transformed Whitmore and Associates into one of the most respected consulting firms in the Tri-County area. The success allowed me to do something I'd always dreamed of. I bought a house. Not just any house, but a beautiful Victorian-era home on Thornfield Avenue, complete with original hardwood floors, stained glass windows, and a wraparound porch that overlooked the Willowbrook River. The house had been built in 1898 by a railroad magnate named Cornelius Thornfield, and it had all the character and charm that came with over a century of history. I remember the day I got the keys. I was 35 years old, single, and proud as could be. I stood in the empty living room with its 15-foot ceilings and ornate crown molding, and I knew I was home. This wasn't just a house, it was a statement, a declaration that Eleanor Whitmore had made it on her own terms. Over the years, I poured my heart and soul into that house. I restored the original fixtures, carefully maintained the period details, and slowly furnished each room with pieces that told my story. The mahogany desk in my study where I'd built my business empire, the antique china cabinet in the dining room that had belonged to my grandmother, the reading nook by the bay window where I'd spent countless evenings with a cup of tea and a good book. But houses aren't just about the walls and the furniture. They're about the memories made within them. And oh, the memories I made in that house. David was born in 1990, and from the moment he took his first breath, he was different from his siblings. Where Sarah was studious and Michael was nurturing, David was restless and ambitious in a way that sometimes worried me. As a child, he was always looking for shortcuts, always trying to find the easiest path to whatever he wanted. If Sarah would study for hours to earn an A, David would charm his way into extra credit assignments that required half the effort. Don't misunderstand me. I loved David fiercely, but as he grew older, his relationship with money and success became increasingly complicated. In high school, he started several small businesses, selling candy to classmates, offering to do homework for others, even scalping tickets to school events. While I admired his entrepreneurial spirit, I worried about some of his methods. After high school, David attended Riverside University like his siblings, but his heart was never really in his studies. He was more interested in networking, in finding connections that might lead to quick profits. He graduated with a business degree, but barely, and immediately dove into a series of investment opportunities that seemed to change every few months. Cryptocurrency, day trading, multi-level marketing schemes, real estate flipping. David was always chasing the next big thing that would make him wealthy overnight. And remarkably, sometimes it worked. He'd have a few good months, drive up to the house in a new car, wearing expensive clothes and talking about his latest success. But invariably, the good times would be followed by periods where he'd disappear for weeks, only to resurface asking for a loan to tide him over until his next big break. Jonathan, bless his heart, always believed in giving David the benefit of the doubt. He's young, he's trying to find his way. We need to be patient with him. And patient we were, perhaps to a fault. We bailed David out of more financial scrapes than I care to count, always with the promise that this would be the last time that he'd learned his lesson. In 2018, Jonathan began showing signs of what we later learned was early-onset Alzheimer's disease. The diagnosis hit our family like a thunderbolt. This brilliant man who could recite Shakespeare from memory and discuss the philosophical implications of Dickens' social commentary was slowly losing himself to a disease that stole memories and replaced them with confusion. The next 3 years were the hardest of my life. I watched the love of my life fade away piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. David, to his credit, was more present during this time than he'd been in years. He'd visit regularly, help with Jonathan's care, and seemed genuinely concerned about his father's declining health. Jonathan passed away in the spring of 2021, peacefully in his sleep, in our bedroom overlooking the river. The funeral was small but beautiful, held in the same garden where we'd been married 34 years earlier. Sarah flew in from Portland, Michael drove up from his home in Nashville, and David was there too, more subdued than I had ever seen him. After the funeral, the house felt impossibly large and quiet. Every room held memories of Jonathan, his coffee cup still sitting on the kitchen counter, his reading glasses on the nightstand, his favorite sweater hanging in the closet. Sarah and Michael both offered to have me come stay with them, but I couldn't imagine leaving the house that held a lifetime of memories. David had a different idea. In the months following his father's death, he began visiting more frequently, but his conversations had a different tone than before. Where once he'd talked about his latest business ventures or asked for financial help, now he focused on my living situation. "Mom, this house is way too big for you now. You're rattling around in here all alone. Don't you think it would be better to find something smaller, more manageable?" At first, I appreciated his concern. It was true that maintaining the house had become more challenging as I had gotten older. The garden that I had once tended with such care was becoming overgrown, and some of the repairs needed were beyond my physical capabilities. But every time David brought up the subject, something in his tone made me uncomfortable. "I'm not ready to leave yet," I tell him. "This house is my life, David. Every room has a story. I can't just walk away from that." "But Mom, think practically," he'd persist. "The property taxes alone must be eating into your retirement savings, and the maintenance costs. When was the last time you had the roof inspected or the electrical system updated? You're sitting on a gold mine here, but you're not thinking strategically about it." That word, strategically, always made my stomach tighten. In my business career, I'd learned to recognize when someone was trying to sell me something, and David's sudden concern for my housing situation felt suspiciously like a sales pitch. The conversations became more frequent and more insistent throughout 2022 and into 2023. David would arrive with real estate listings for charming condos or active senior communities, complete with amenities and activities that he assured me would be perfect for someone in your stage of life. He'd calculated the potential sale price of the house, factoring in the current real estate market and the property's prime location near downtown Willowbrook. You could live very comfortably on the proceeds, he'd explain, spreading documents across my dining room table. No more worrying about maintenance or property taxes. No more being alone in this big house. You'd have neighbors, activities, maybe even make some new friends. But I wasn't ready. The house wasn't just my home. It was my sanctuary, my connection to Jonathan, and the physical embodiment of everything I had worked for. Yes, it was large for one person, and yes, it required maintenance that was becoming more challenging, but it was mine in a way that no condo or retirement community could ever be. What I didn't realize was that David had been doing more than just making suggestions. He'd been researching, planning, and preparing for something that would shake the very foundation of everything I thought I knew about my own life. The first sign that something was amiss came in late September of 2023. I was in my study, working on some consulting projects that I still took on occasionally to keep my mind sharp, when I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the lace curtains of my front window, I saw David's latest vehicle, a sleek black Mercedes that he'd acquired during one of his successful periods. But he wasn't alone. With him were two people I didn't recognize, a woman in a sharp business suit carrying a briefcase and a man with a clipboard and a camera. They stood at the edge of my garden, the woman pointing at different aspects of the house while the man took notes and photos. I watched from my window as they walked around the property, examining the foundation, testing the stability of the front porch railing, and measuring various dimensions. The woman seemed to be explaining something to David, gesturing enthusiastically while he nodded and smiled. When they finished their inspection, David knocked on my front door, but something about his demeanor was different. He seemed nervous, avoiding my eyes as he introduced his companions as real estate professionals who were just helping him understand the current market value of properties in the neighborhood. For insurance purposes, he explained when I pressed him for details. I want to make sure you're adequately covered in case anything happens to the house. It was a plausible explanation, and I wanted to believe it, but the way the woman had examined my home, like she was already envisioning changes and improvements, made me deeply uneasy. That night, I called Patricia, my old business partner and friend, and told her about the strange visit. "Eleanor," she said in that direct way that had made her such an effective business partner, "that wasn't an insurance assessment, that was a real estate evaluation. I'd bet my pension on it." Her words confirmed my worst fears, but I still hoped I was wrong. Maybe David was just being overly cautious, trying to help me plan for the future. Maybe I was reading too much into a simple insurance matter. But over the following weeks, David's behavior became increasingly suspicious. He'd ask seemingly casual questions about my finances, my will, and my long-term care preferences. He'd mention friends of his who had helped their parents transition to more appropriate living situations, and how grateful those parents had been afterwards. Most troubling of all, he'd started asking about the house's ownership documents, claiming he wanted to help me organize my important papers in case of an emergency. When I told him that all my legal documents were safely stored with my attorney, Harold Pemberton, David's expression darkened for just a moment before he forced a smile and changed the subject. By November, I'd begun to suspect that David was planning something that would dramatically change my life, whether I wanted it to or not. The realization filled me with a mixture of sadness and anger that surprised me with its intensity. This was my son, the child I'd raised and loved and supported through all his schemes and failures. How could he be plotting against me?
But the evidence was mounting, and my business instincts, honed through decades of dealing with people who weren't always honest about their intentions, were screaming that something was very, very wrong. What I didn't know was just how wrong things were about to get, or how David had underestimated not just my resolve, but also my ability to protect what was mine. The storm was coming, and I was about to discover just how far my youngest child was willing to go to get what he wanted. But David had made one crucial mistake. He'd forgotten that his mother hadn't built a successful business empire by being naive or unprepared. And he was about to learn that lesson in the most expensive way possible. The morning of December 15th, 2023 started like any other. I was in my kitchen, brewing my usual cup of Earl Grey and watching the winter frost coat the windows of my sunroom, when I heard the familiar sound of David's Mercedes pulling into my driveway. Through the lace curtains of my front window, I watched as David emerged from his car, followed by two men in expensive suits and a woman carrying what appeared to be a stack of legal documents. My heart immediately began racing. This wasn't a casual visit. This was an ambush. David knocked on my door with an authority I'd never heard from him before. When I opened it, his usual charming smile was replaced by something colder, more businesslike.
"Good morning, Mom," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk. These are my associates, Mr. Harrison from Harrison Real Estate, Mr. Phillips, my attorney, and Miss Rodriguez from Riverside Property Management." I stood in my own entryway, suddenly feeling like an intruder in my own home, as these strangers filed into my living room and began spreading documents across my coffee table, the same antique table where Jonathan and I had shared countless Sunday morning crossword puzzles. "David, what is this about?" I asked, though deep in my heart I already knew. Mr. Phillips, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the demeanor of someone accustomed to delivering bad news, spoke first. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm afraid we have some rather urgent legal matters to discuss with you. It concerns the ownership and immediate sale of this property." My blood ran cold. The sale of my property? I haven't authorized any sale. David stepped forward, and for the first time I saw a side of my son that truly frightened me. His eyes held no warmth, no filial affection, only cold calculation. "Mom, I'm sorry it has to be this way, but you've left me no choice. Over the past year, I've been trying to help you make the smart decision about this house, but you've been too stubborn to see reason, so I've had to take matters into my own hands." Miss Rodriguez opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Mrs. Whitmore, 3 months ago, your son David initiated legal proceedings to have you declared mentally incompetent to manage your own affairs. Given your age and recent behavior, living alone in this large house, refusing reasonable assistance with basic decisions, a judge has granted him temporary conservatorship over your estate." The words hit me like physical blows. That's impossible. I haven't been notified of any legal proceedings. I haven't been evaluated by any doctors. This is fraud. Mr. Phillips adjusted his glasses and spoke in the monotone voice of someone who delivered this speech many times before. "I'm afraid the proceedings were conducted properly, Mrs. Whitmore. Your son provided extensive documentation of your inability to make sound financial decisions, including your refusal to accept reasonable housing alternatives despite the obvious impracticality of maintaining this property at your age." David had been pacing behind the sofa, but now he stopped and looked at me with what I can only describe as pity mixed with impatience. "Mom, I tried to do this the easy way. I gave you every opportunity to make the smart choice, but you're 74 years old, living alone in a house that's far too big for you, refusing all reasonable suggestions for alternatives. The court agreed that someone needed to step in and make the responsible decisions." My mind was reeling, but my business instincts were kicking in. Something about this entire situation felt wrong.
Not just morally wrong, but legally wrong. I want to see these court documents. I want to call my attorney. Harold Pemberton has handled my legal affairs for over 20 years. That won't be necessary, Mr. Harrison interjected. He was a large man with the aggressive demeanor of someone accustomed to pressuring people into quick decisions. We've already secured a buyer for the property. A very generous offer, actually, $850,000, which is quite good in the current market. The closing is scheduled for January 3rd, which gives you just over 2 weeks to arrange alternative housing. $850,000? I'd owned this house for nearly 40 years, and I knew its value better than anyone. In the current Willowbrook real estate market, with its prime location near downtown and the river, plus all the historical renovations I had made, the house was worth at least $1.2 million, probably more. That's significantly below market value, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Any competent realtor would tell you this property is worth at least $1.2 million. David's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw a flash of that desperate, scheming young man I'd been bailing out of trouble for decades. Mom, we don't have the luxury of waiting for the perfect buyer. You need immediate care, and I need to liquidate assets quickly to pay for a proper assisted living facility. Miss Rodriguez handed me a set of keys to my own house, along with an official-looking document. Mrs. Whitmore, these are temporary housing arrangements we've secured for you at Willowbrook Manor, an excellent assisted living facility just 15 minutes from here. You'll have 30 days to pack your personal belongings, but the house needs to be vacated by January 15th for the new owners. I stared at the keys in my hand, keys to a life I'd never chosen, in a place I'd never wanted to go. But more than the shock and hurt, I felt something else building inside me. Rage. Pure, cold, businesswoman's rage at being manipulated and deceived by someone I'd trusted implicitly. I need to make a phone call, I said quietly. Mom, there's really no point in... I said I need to make a phone call. The steel in my voice stopped him mid-sentence. It was the same tone I'd used in boardrooms when lesser men tried to intimidate me, the voice that had built Whitmore and Associates into a force to be reckoned with. I walked to my study, Jonathan and I's sanctuary, and closed the door behind me. With shaking hands, I dialed Harold Pemberton's direct line. Harold, it's Eleanor Whitmore, and I need your help immediately. Harold Pemberton had been my attorney for over 20 years, and in all that time, I'd never heard him sound as angry as he did after I explained the situation.
Eleanor, this is the most outrageous case of elder fraud I've encountered in 30 years of practice. Everything they've told you is false. There are no conservatorship proceedings on file in any court in this county. What your son has done is criminal fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by determination. What do we do, Harold? First, don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and don't leave that house. Second, I'm calling the police and the district attorney's office. What David has attempted is a felony, and those accomplices of his are about to find themselves in very serious legal trouble. When I returned to the living room 20 minutes later, my entire demeanor had changed. The shocked, confused elderly woman these people thought they were manipulating was gone, replaced by the sharp, confident businesswoman who had never backed down from a fight. David looked up expectantly. So, Mom, did you call someone to help you pack? I smiled, a cold, calculating smile that I hadn't used since my most ruthless business negotiations. Actually, David, I made several calls. But before we discuss those, I have a question for all of you. I turned to Mr. Phillips. Mr. Phillips, what's your bar certification number? The man blinked in confusion. I'm sorry. Your bar certification number. Surely an attorney would know his own professional license number. I pulled out my phone and opened the State Bar Association website. Because I'm looking at the licensed attorney database right now, and there's no lawyer named Phillips registered in this state. The color drained from the man's face. David stepped forward quickly. Mom, what does that matter? The legal proceedings are fake. I interrupted. "Just like Mr. Phillips here is fake. And Miss Rodriguez, let me guess, you don't actually work for Riverside Property Management, do you? Because I just called them and they've never heard of you." The woman who had been so confident moments before was now looking toward the door like a trapped animal. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, "is that my son thought he could run a con game on someone who spent 40 years dealing with people trying to cheat her." David's face had gone from pale to flushed. "Mom, you don't understand what you're doing. The conservatorship is real. The sale has to happen." "David, stop lying." I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd prepared weeks ago when I'd first begun suspecting something was wrong. "I've been investigating your little scheme for 2 months. I know about the gambling debts. I know about the failed cryptocurrency investments. I know about the loan sharks who've been calling you." His eyes widened in shock. "How did you—" "Because I'm not the helpless old woman you thought I was. I'm Eleanor Whitmore, and I didn't build a business empire by being naive." I opened the folder and began reading. "You owe $340,000 to various creditors. Your latest investment opportunity collapsed 3 weeks ago, leaving you with nothing. You've been telling people you owned this house, using it as collateral for loans you can't repay." The fake Mr. Phillips was edging toward the door, but I continued. "But here's what you forgot to check, David. Here's the one detail that makes your entire scheme impossible." I walked to my filing cabinet and pulled out a legal document that I'd retrieved from my safe deposit box the day before, acting on a hunch that had been building for weeks. "This house isn't mine to sell, David. It never was." The room went completely silent. David stared at me in confusion. "What are you talking about? Of course it's yours. You've lived here for 40 years. I smiled and held up the document. "This is the original deed to this property, filed in 1898 when it was built, and this is the amendment filed in 1987, 2 years after your father and I were married." I turned the document so everyone could see it. "The legal owner of this property is the Blackwell Family Trust, established by your father Jonathan in 1987. I am merely the lifetime beneficiary and caretaker. Upon my death, ownership passes directly to my children, but only if the trust conditions are met." David snatched the document from my hands, his eyes scanning it frantically. "This can't be right. Dad never told me about any trust. Because you never asked about anything that didn't directly benefit you," I said quietly. "Your father set up this trust to protect the family home from exactly what you're trying to do right now, prevent anyone from manipulating me into selling it." I retrieved another document from my folder, but here's the part you really should have checked, David. The trust has very specific conditions about what happens if any beneficiary attempts to defraud, manipulate, coerce, or otherwise illegally influence the trustee, that's me, into actions that would compromise the trust. David's face was now completely white as I read from the trust document. "Any beneficiary who attempts to defraud, manipulate, coerce, or otherwise illegally influence the trustee shall immediately forfeit all rights to any portion of the trust assets, which shall then be redistributed among the remaining beneficiaries." The implications hit him like a physical blow. No, that's not— You can't. What I can do, David, is ensure that your actions today have consequences." I looked at my watch. My attorney, Harold Pemberton, should be arriving any moment, along with Detective Martinez from the Willowbrook Police Department. They'll be very interested in discussing fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy charges with all of you. The fake Ms. Rodriguez bolted for the door, followed immediately by the fake Mr. Phillips. David started after them, then stopped and turned back to me with desperation in his eyes. "Mom, please. You don't understand. These people I owe money to, they're not the kind of people who accept payment plans. If I don't come up with the money soon, then you should have thought of that before you decided to steal your mother's home," I interrupted. "You should have thought of that before you hired actors to impersonate lawyers and property managers. You should have thought of that before you tried to have me declared mentally incompetent." Tears were streaming down his face now. "I'm your son. You can't just abandon me." The words broke my heart, but I had spent too many years enabling David's destructive behavior to continue down that path. I'm not abandoning you, David. I'm finally parenting you. For the first time in your life, you're going to face the full consequences of your choices. The sound of car doors slamming outside announced the arrival of Harold Pemberton and Detective Martinez. Through my window, I could see the fake Phillips and Rodriguez being apprehended by 2 additional police officers who had been waiting outside. As Detective Martinez placed handcuffs on David, he looked at me with a mixture of hatred and betrayal that I knew would haunt me for the rest of my life. "This isn't over," he said as they led him toward the police car. "Yes, David," I replied quietly. "It is." 6 months later. I'm sitting in my sunroom as I write this, watching the spring flowers bloom in the garden that Jonathan and I planted together so many years ago. The house is quiet, but it's a peaceful quiet now, not the tense silence that had filled it during those final months of David's scheme. The legal proceedings were swift and decisive. David pleaded guilty to attempted fraud and elder abuse in exchange for a reduced sentence of 2 years in prison and 5 years probation. The actors he'd hired received shorter sentences in exchange for their cooperation. David's portion of the Blackwell family trust was redistributed to Sarah and Michael as the trust documents specified. Sarah flew in from Portland the week after David's arrest, and we had the long, difficult conversation that I'd been avoiding for years. She'd suspected that David was heading toward something like this, but like me, she'd hoped that love and patience would eventually set him on the right path. "Mom, I'm proud of you for finally drawing the line. David needed consequences, and you gave them to him." Michael drove up from Nashville a few days later, and his perspective as a healthcare professional added another dimension to the situation. "David has been showing signs of antisocial personality disorder for years," he told me gently. "His willingness to manipulate and deceive people who love him, his inability to feel genuine remorse for his actions, these aren't character flaws that patience can fix. They're psychological issues that require professional intervention. The hardest part of this entire experience hasn't been David's betrayal or his criminal behavior. It's accepting that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their destructive choices and allow them to face the consequences of their actions." I've received 2 letters from David since he's been in prison. The first was filled with anger and accusations, blaming me for ruining his life and choosing money over family. I didn't respond to that one. The second letter, which arrived last week, was different. It was shorter, more subdued, and for the first time in years, it sounded like it came from the little boy I'd once tucked into bed in the room upstairs. "Mom, I'm starting to understand what I did to you, and to our family. The counselor here says I have a lot of work to do if I want to become the kind of person who deserves forgiveness. I don't know if you'll ever be able to forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm finally ready to try to become someone worthy of being your son again." I haven't responded to that letter yet, but I will. Because despite everything that happened, despite the betrayal and the heartbreak and the realization that my youngest child was willing to steal my home and have me declared mentally incompetent, David is still my son. And while I will never again enable his destructive choices, I will always leave the door open for genuine redemption. The house on Thornfield Avenue remains my sanctuary. I've made some modifications to make it safer and more manageable for a woman my age. Grab bars in the bathrooms, better lighting on the stairs, a medical alert system that connects directly to the hospital. But I haven't downsized, and I won't. This house is more than just a place to live. It's the physical embodiment of a life well lived, of challenges overcome, and of love that endures even when it's tested by betrayal. Sarah visits more frequently now, often bringing her teenage children to spend weekends in the house where their father grew up. Michael comes up from Nashville every few months, and we work together in the garden that his stepfather loved so much. The house is once again filled with laughter and family dinners, and the sound of children playing in rooms that had been too quiet for too long. I still run a small consulting practice from my study, helping local businesses navigate challenges and opportunities. At 75, I'm not ready to retire completely, and the work keeps my mind sharp and my sense of purpose intact. Last month, I helped a young woman start a catering business from her home kitchen, and watching her succeed reminded me why I fell in love with business consulting in the first place. Sometimes, late at night, when the house settles around me, I think about the choices that led to that terrible December morning when my son tried to steal my home. I think about the enablement, the missed opportunities for tough love, the times when I chose hope over wisdom. But I also think about the strength I found when I needed it most, the business instincts that protected me when love wasn't enough, and the family and friends who rallied around me when I needed support. Most of all, I think about Jonathan and how proud he would be that I fought to protect the home we built together. The trust he established wasn't just a legal document. It was a love letter from a man who understood that sometimes protection requires preparation. David made one crucial mistake in his elaborate scheme to steal my house. He forgot that I wasn't just his mother, a woman who would always forgive and enable and protect him from consequences. He forgot that I was Eleanor Whitmore, a woman who would build something significant with her own hands and her own will, and who would fight to protect what was hers. The house on Thornfield Avenue stands as it has for over a century, weathering storms and seasons and the passage of time. And, like the house itself, I remain, scarred by betrayal but not defeated by it, older and wiser and more careful about trust, but still standing strong in the home I've earned and the life I've built. That morning when David handed me eviction papers for my own home and told me I had 30 days to move out, I smiled and said I needed to make one phone call. What happened next didn't just leave him speechless, it taught him the most expensive lesson of his life, and taught me something valuable about the power of preparation, the importance of boundaries, and the difference between enabling someone you love and actually loving them. Some storms are meant to destroy, but others are meant to reveal what's strong enough to survive. David's betrayal was a storm I never saw coming, but when it passed, I was still standing in my garden, watching the flowers bloom, grateful for the home that love built and wisdom protected. And that, I believe, is the most valuable lesson of all, that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to say no, when to draw the line, and when to let someone you love face the consequences of their choices. It's not the easy path, but it's the right one. The house on Thornfield Avenue will outlast all of us, just as it has outlasted those who came before. But while I'm here, it will remain a testament to the power of perseverance, the importance of preparation, and the enduring strength of a woman who refused to let anyone, not even her own son, take away what she had rightfully earned. David forgot to check who really owned the house, but more than that, he forgot who had raised him, who had built an empire with her own hands, and who would never go down without a fight. That was his mistake, and it cost him everything.